The thing about 3M. There is a specific kind of honesty that only exists at 3M. Not the honesty of daylight, which is deliberate and chosen and carries the weight of consequence. The honesty of a person who has decided to tell the truth and has prepared for what comes after. No, this is a different kind entirely. The 3M kind arrives without permission, sidesteps every careful defense you have constructed, and says the things that the responsible waking mind has spent years learning to keep quiet. It is the honesty of exhaustion, of walls worn thin by the hour, of a consciousness that has simply run out of the energy required to maintain its usual performance. I know this because I am a person who has spent a very long time maintaining a very careful performance, and the only time it ever fully came apart was at 3M, in the kitchen of a small apartment in Austin, Texas, with a cup of tea going cold on the counter and my best friend sitting across the table looking at me like he already knew every word I was about to say. My name is Adrian Flores. I am 25 years old, the youngest of four siblings in a large and loud Mexican-American family from San Antonio, currently living in Austin, where I moved 2 years ago for a job in graphic design that I am good at and find meaningful and which is not, ultimately, the most important thing that has happened to me in this city. The most important thing that has happened to me in this city is a person. It is almost always a person. His name is Caleb Morris. And this is the story of the night we were too tired to pretend anymore and what happened after. How we became us. Caleb and I met at a housewarming party 14 months before the 3M conversation, in the crowded living room of a mutual friend's new apartment, where neither of us knew more than 3 people and both of us had independently retreated to the perimeter of the room with drinks in our hands and the expression of people who like people in theory, but find large social gatherings somewhat exhausting in practice. He noticed me first, or at least he made the first move, which may not be the same thing. He appeared at my shoulder and said, without preamble, "Do you know anyone here, or are you also here entirely out of obligation to someone who invited you 6 weeks ago, and you said yes before you understood what you were agreeing to?" I looked at him. He was tall, several inches taller than me, which I mention only because it was the first thing I registered, followed immediately by the quality of his expression, which was simultaneously self-deprecating and entirely comfortable, the expression of someone who knows he has just said a slightly strange thing and is not particularly worried about it. "I know the host," I said. "We went to college together. I haven't seen her in 2 years and I forgot that I'm bad at parties until I was already inside." "Same situation, different person," he said. He put his hand out. "Caleb Morris. I work with the host's boyfriend and made the mistake of being too agreeable when invited. Adrian Flores, graphic designer, currently regretting every social decision I have made this month." He smiled at that, a real smile, the kind that reaches the eyes without being performed. "There's a balcony," he said. "I scouted it earlier, much better acoustics." "Lead the way," I said. We spent the rest of the party on that balcony, talking with the ease of 2 people who have unexpectedly found the exact right conversational frequency. He was a high school history teacher, which surprised me because he didn't fit my mental image of what a history teacher looked like. He was 30, only 5 years older than me at the time, with the kind of relaxed intelligence that wore its knowledge lightly. He talked about history the way I talked about design, as a living thing, full of human texture, never abstract. He asked good questions and listened to the answers with genuine attention. He laughed easily and without self-consciousness. By the end of the evening, I had his number and a standing invitation to a weekly trivia night at a bar near his apartment that he attended with 2 colleagues, and which, he assured me, was not as intimidating as competitive trivia sounds. It was significantly more intimidating than competitive trivia sounds. I went anyway, every week, for the next 14 months. The friendship built itself in the natural way of adult friendships that actually take, gradually, through accumulated shared time, through the specific alchemy of two people who find each other genuinely interesting and are willing to keep showing up. Trivia Tuesdays became a fixed point in both our weeks. Weekend mornings sometimes produced spontaneous breakfast plans. When I had a difficult project deadline, he would appear with food and the particular gift of being comfortable with silence, sitting across from me while I worked without demanding conversation. When he had a hard week with a student or a frustrating interaction with administration, I was the person he called, and I understood that this was not nothing, that being chosen as the person someone calls is a form of trust that should be honored. He was, I came to understand, one of the most genuinely good people I had ever known. Not good in the passive sense of someone who simply avoids causing harm, but good in the active sense, someone who thought carefully about how to treat people, who noticed when someone in a room was uncomfortable and moved toward them rather than away, who remembered small things and followed up on them. His students adored him. His colleagues respected him. His friends, of whom I was becoming one of the closest, trusted him with the real things. And I was doing what I always do, which is be genuinely present in the friendship while maintaining, with practiced invisibility, a specific interior distance. Being warm without being fully known. Being the person he called while not quite being the person who could make a particular kind of call myself. Because somewhere in the middle of 14 months of trivia nights and spontaneous breakfasts and late evening phone calls, I had developed feelings for Caleb Morris that I had absolutely no idea what to do with, and which I had filed in the standard interior folder with the standard practiced efficiency, and which were nonetheless accumulating in the way that feelings do when you try to store them without processing them. Quietly, persistently, taking up more space than you allocated. The problem with being in love with your best friend is not the loving. The loving, in isolation, is the easiest and most natural thing in the world. The problem is the arithmetic of risk. What you stand to lose if you say something versus what you stand to lose if you don't, and the terrifying discovery that both sides of that equation have real and significant values. I had been doing this arithmetic for approximately 8 months. I had not arrived at a conclusion. I had arrived instead at the 3M conversation, which arrived before I was ready for it, and turned out to be the only kind of ready there is. The night before the conversation. It was a Friday in March, and we had both had bad weeks. This was not unusual. Bad weeks happen to everyone, and we had navigated each other's bad weeks before. But this particular Friday felt heavier than usual, in the specific way of weeks where multiple difficult things have converged simultaneously, and the cumulative weight of them is more than the sum of the parts. For me, a major client project had gone badly wrong at the 11th hour, requiring 3 days of emergency revisions that had left me running on minimal sleep and maximum anxiety. And beneath that, because my mind does not separate its troubles neatly into professional and personal categories, a conversation I had overheard at work, 2 colleagues discussing a mutual friend who had recently come out, and the specific texture of their reaction, which was not unkind but was also not warm, which was the careful neutrality of people who are trying to be acceptable and not quite managing to be actually good. I had stood in the hallway outside the break room and listened and felt something cold move through me, and had gone back to my desk and worked for 4 more hours without speaking to anyone. For Caleb, I learned the details of his week later in pieces during the conversation itself. The short version is this: a student of his, a junior named Patrick, had confided in him after class that week, had told him something personal and frightening and true, something that Patrick had told no adult before. Caleb had handled it with every ounce of the care and skill he possessed, had said the right things and connected Patrick with the right resources and followed up the next day and the day after. He had done everything right. And he had gone home both nights afterward and sat alone in his apartment, with the weight of a young person's pain that he had absorbed, carefully and willingly, and which had nowhere to go once the professional response was complete. He texted me at 9:30 that Friday evening, "Just bad week, you around?" I texted back, "Come over. I have leftover enchiladas and a very strong opinion about what we should watch." He arrived 20 minutes later with a bottle of sparkling water because he knew I preferred it to soda, and an expression that confirmed that whatever his week had contained, it had been genuinely hard. I did not ask immediately. I made him a plate of enchiladas and put something on the television, a nature documentary, the kind with sweeping landscapes and a narrator with a calming voice, the kind that asks nothing of the viewer, and we sat on the couch and ate and let the documentary do its work. By midnight, the documentary had ended, and we had talked through the surface layers of both our weeks: the client disaster, the general texture of March in the middle of the school year exhaustion, a funny thing that had happened at trivia the previous Tuesday that we had not had time to properly discuss. We had not yet gotten to the real things. We were circling them, the way you circle the real things when you are not quite ready, and also when you are very tired and the hour is making your defenses thin. At some point, I could not tell you exactly when, because time does something strange in late-night conversations, expanding and contracting outside its usual measurements. I looked over and realized that Caleb was not watching the second documentary that had begun automatically after the first. He was looking at the middle distance with the expression of someone who is very far inside their own thoughts. "Hey," I said quietly, "where are you?" He came back slowly, looked at me, and said, "Can I tell you something, something real?" "Always," I said, because it was true. It had always been true. He told me about Patrick. Not all the details, those were not his to share, but the shape of it. A young person carrying something heavy and frightening. The specific weight of being trusted with something that precious. The helplessness that lives underneath the competence. The part of you that has done everything right and still feels like it wasn't enough. Because the right thing and the sufficient thing are not always the same thing. I listened the way he had always listened to me, completely, without redirecting, without minimizing. When he finished, I didn't try to fix it or resolve it. I said, "That's a heavy thing to carry alone all week." "Yeah," he said, "it is. You're not carrying it alone now." He looked at me. Something in his expression shifted, something that I caught and held in that place where I held things I wasn't sure what to do with. "No," he said, "I'm not." We sat in the quiet of the apartment. The documentary murmured in the background. Outside, Austin did its late Friday night things, music from somewhere down the block, the occasional car, the city's particular nighttime atmosphere of warmth and noise kept just at the edge of hearing. At some point, the clock on the microwave read 1:47 a.m. Neither of us had suggested ending the evening. Neither of us was trying to. 3 m. I made tea at some point. The transition from the couch to the kitchen happened naturally, the way it does in long evenings that have found their rhythm, and we ended up at the kitchen table instead of the couch, which felt right for the next layer of the conversation without either of us deciding it. The kitchen table is where the real conversations happen. I have always believed this. The couch is for comfort and entertainment and the surface layers of things. The kitchen table is where you sit when you are ready, or when you are too tired not to be ready, to say the actual thing. Caleb was holding his mug in both hands and looking at the table, and I was across from him doing the same thing. And the clock somewhere in the apartment read something past 2:30, and the specific quality of that hour was doing what it always does, which is make the carefully maintained architecture of your defenses feel very far away and very unnecessary. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said. His voice was different from earlier, quieter, more careful, the voice of someone approaching something they have been circling for a while. "Yeah," I said. "And I need you to answer honestly, not the answer you think I want, the actual answer." Something in my chest tightened slightly. "Okay," I said. He looked at his mug. "Are you happy, like actually, not fine, not managing? Are you genuinely happy with your life right now?" The question was not what I had expected. I sat with it, really sat with it, gave it the honest consideration it was asking for rather than the reflexive reassurance I would have produced in daylight. Am I happy? The real answer assembled itself slowly and without flattery. Parts of it, I said. My work, yes, mostly. Austin, yes, I love this city. You, I stopped. The friendship, that part is the best part. But, he said, he heard the incompleteness. There are things I carry, I said carefully. Things I haven't said out loud. To anyone. I paused. Things that make the happy parts feel partial. Like I'm enjoying a really good meal but eating it standing up in the corner of the room instead of actually sitting down at the table. He was quiet for a moment. What kind of things? The 3M honesty was doing its work. My defenses were thin and far away, and the kitchen was warm, and the person across the table was the person I trusted most in this city. And the tea was going cold, and something in me had simply run out of the energy required to maintain the usual arrangement. Who I am, I said quietly, I carry that. The full version of who I am, I show most of it, not all of it. I looked at my mug. The part I don't show is significant. Silence, a real one, the kind with weight. Adrian, Caleb said. His voice was very gentle. Are you talking about being gay? The word landed in the warm kitchen air and settled there, and I looked up from my mug and at him, and his face was entirely open and entirely without judgment, and something in my chest did something complicated. A loosening, a relief, a terror all at once. Yes, I said. The word came out smaller than I intended. I've never said it out loud to anyone, ever. He didn't move. He didn't change expression. He simply said, "Thank you for telling me." And something about those 4 words, so simple, so direct, so entirely without the complicated reaction I had been fearing for years, made my eyes sting in a way I had not anticipated and was not prepared for. I've been carrying it for a long time, I said. My voice was not entirely steady. Since I was 17, that's 8 years of, I stopped. 8 years of knowing something about myself and not saying it, because my family and work and the world is complicated, and I kept thinking I'd find the right moment and the right words and I stopped again. And it turns out the right moment is apparently past 2:30 in the morning in my kitchen with cold tea. He almost smiled at that. Not unkindly, warmly, the smile of someone who recognizes the absurdity and the truth of it simultaneously. The right moment is the one where you're too tired to do it wrong, he said. Yes, I said, exactly that. We sat in the silence for a moment. Outside, the city had gone quieter. The music from down the block had stopped. The cars were fewer. The particular hush of 3M settling over everything. How does it feel? Caleb asked, saying it. I thought about it genuinely. Like I've been holding my breath for 8 years, I said, and I just exhaled. He nodded slowly. Yeah, he said, I imagine it does. A pause. He looked at his tea. Something moved across his face, something I was too relieved and too overwhelmed to read precisely. I need to tell you something too, he said, if we're being honest tonight. I looked at him. Okay. I've been carrying something too, he said. Something I've been very carefully not saying for a while now. He paused. Can I tell you? Of course, I said, always. What he had been carrying. He told me. Not all at once, like everything real. It came in pieces, in the non-linear order that things emerge when they have been stored for a long time and the container finally opens. I sat across the table and I listened and I tried to be, for him, what he had just been for me. Present, open, without the complicated reaction that makes people afraid to say the truth. Caleb Morris had known he was gay since he was 22. This was not, he said, a thing he had struggled to understand. The understanding had arrived with unexpected clarity during his first year of teaching, when the performance of a straightness he had maintained through college and young adulthood had simply become too exhausting to sustain, and had dropped away in the privacy of his own apartment one evening like a coat he'd been wearing in the wrong season. He had told his sister first, his older sister Claire, who had received it with the matter-of-fact warmth of someone who had suspected for years and was relieved to have the suspicion confirmed. He had told two close friends from college. He had, in the 8 years since, lived openly in the private spaces of his life, while maintaining a careful ambiguity in the professional one, not lying, not hiding exactly, but not offering either, navigating the particular calculation of a teacher in a public school in Texas, where the calculus of being out in the classroom was more complex and more fraught than it was in many other contexts. "It's not that I'm ashamed," he said carefully. "I want to be clear about that, I'm not. I stopped being ashamed a long time ago. It's more strategic, situational. There are people in my school who would be unkind about it, and more importantly, there are kids in my classroom who need me to still be there, still be effective, and I've made a judgment about how to manage that." He paused. "Whether it's the right judgment is something I think about. I don't always feel certain about it." "That makes sense," I said. And it did. The specific, complicated pragmatism of it, the kind that is easy to judge from the outside and much harder to navigate from within. "But that's not the thing I've been carrying," he said. "That's background, context." He looked at his mug. He looked at the table. He looked at me with the specific expression of someone who has arrived at the edge of something they decided some time ago not to approach and is now at the edge anyway. "The thing I've been carrying is something else." He stopped, and I waited, and the clock somewhere in the apartment quietly moved through the deep middle of the night. "I think I know," he said, correcting himself, "that what I feel about you it's not only friendship. It hasn't been only friendship for a while. I don't know exactly when it changed. I just know that at some point in the last several months I started noticing the absence of you more than is explained by friendship. I started looking forward to Tuesday with a specific quality that I recognized, because I've felt it before about other people, and I know what it means." He exhaled slowly. "And I've been telling myself it was manageable, that it didn't need to be said, that saying it risked something more important than not saying it, that the friendship was the most important thing and I should protect it." He looked at me directly. His gray-green eyes were very steady, very open, the 3M honesty in them as complete as anything I had ever seen. "And then you just told me the truest thing you've told anyone in 8 years, he said. "And it felt dishonest to sit here with my own true thing and not say it." The kitchen was very still, the tea was cold, the city outside was quiet. I was looking at him and feeling something move through me that I had no adequate words for, something that was simultaneously the thing I had most hoped to hear, and the thing I had most deeply convinced myself I would never hear. And the collision of those two was producing a kind of internal weather that I could not yet sort into its component parts. "How long?" I managed. "6 months," he said. "Maybe 7, I stopped counting." "6 months," I repeated softly. Mine has been longer, 8 months approximately." Something shifted in his expression. "8 months." "I did the arithmetic," I said. "About whether to say anything, I never solved it." "Neither did I," he said. "Turns out the solution was a Friday night, and 3M and 2 people too tired to keep the calculation going." And despite everything, despite the weight of what had just been said and the enormity of it, and the fact that my hands were not entirely steady, and my heart was doing something irregular and complicated, I laughed. A real laugh, the helpless kind. And he laughed too, and it broke the most intense layer of the tension and left something warmer and more workable in its place. The conversation after the conversation. We talked for another 2 hours. About everything that had just been said, and about the things underneath it, and about what it meant and what we wanted it to mean and what we were afraid of and what we hoped for. The 3M honesty that had opened the door stayed with us. We were both past the point of managing, past the point of calculated disclosure, fully in the territory of the real. He told me about the specific moments in the past 7 months when he had almost said something and talked himself out of it. The Sunday morning at the farmer's market when I had handed him a coffee, and our fingers had overlapped on the cup, and he had thought about it for the rest of the day. The Tuesday 3 months ago when I had arrived at trivia with a new haircut, and he had noticed and said nothing and then gone home and noticed that he had noticed. The evening I had called him, upset about a family situation I had been navigating, and he had sat on the phone with me for 2 hours and said all the right things, and then afterward sat in his own apartment and felt something he recognized and did not act on. I told him about my version of the same 8 months, the accumulation of small moments, each one filed away, each one requiring a small deliberate act of redirection. The specific texture of what it felt like to be in the room with him, the warmth of it, the ease of it, the way my mood connected to his in a way that was deeper than friendship's usual architecture. The Tuesday mornings when I woke up knowing I would see him that evening, and the quality of that knowledge, which was different from anticipating anything else in my week. "We've been idiots," he said at one point, not harshly, with affectionate exasperation, the tone of someone assessing a situation clearly. "Careful idiots," I said. "We were protecting something." "We were protecting something that didn't need to be protected from the truth," he said. "The friendship wasn't going to break from the truth. The friendship is the foundation of this, whatever this is." "Whatever this is," I agreed. We looked at each other across the kitchen table with the empty mugs between us and the 4 quiet of the apartment around us, and something new and unfinished and entirely, completely real in the air between us. "I don't want to rush anything," Caleb said. "I want to say that clearly. Tonight has been a lot of important things happen tonight. I don't think we need to define everything before the sun comes up." "Agreed," I said, but I stopped, found the words. I don't want to go back to not having said it either. Whatever we do with it, I don't want to put it back. "No," he said, "neither do I." We sat in the quiet for a moment. Outside, the first faint lightening of the sky, not dawn yet, not even close, but the preliminary suggestion of it, the night beginning to consider its own ending. "Adrian," he said. "Yeah." "Thank you for saying what you said first, about who you are." He paused. "I don't think I would have said my thing if you hadn't said yours. I'd been sitting on my side of this for 7 months. It was you being brave that made me able to be." I looked at him. "You were the first person I ever told," I said. 8 years and you're the first one." "I know," he said. "I know what that means. I'm not going to treat it carelessly." And I believed him, completely and without reservation, because in 14 months of friendship I had watched him treat everything carefully, his students, his colleagues, his friends, the small and large things that people handed him in trust. I had chosen him as the person to tell, without fully knowing I was choosing, because some part of me had already done the assessment and arrived at the answer. He was safe. He was the safest person I knew. And it turned out he had been waiting on his own side of the same wall, and the wall had come down tonight, and we were both standing in the open air of what was actually true, blinking slightly in the unfamiliar light of it. The morning after, he slept on my couch. This was not unusual. It had happened before, in the ordinary course of late evenings that went past the reasonable hour for driving home. He had his own pillow on my couch, practically speaking, and a toothbrush in my bathroom cabinet. And this had all seemed like normal friendship infrastructure, and now seemed like something more interesting in retrospect. I lay in my bed in the early morning and looked at the ceiling and felt, I want to be precise about this, I felt lighter. Not resolved, not certain, not in possession of a clear picture of what came next, but lighter in the specific way of someone who has set down something heavy they have been carrying for a very long time, and whose arms remember the weight even as the relief of the absence of it settles in. I had told someone, I had said the word out loud to another human being for the first time in my 25 years, and the world had not ended. The person had not changed. The friendship had not broken. What had happened instead was more. Something more than what was there before. Something that I did not yet have full language for, but that felt, unmistakably like an opening rather than a closing. I could hear from the living room the quiet sound of Caleb being awake, the small sounds of a person existing carefully in a space that isn't theirs, trying not to disturb. I lay there and listened to those small sounds and felt something warm and complicated move through me. At 7:30, I got up and made coffee, and he appeared in the kitchen doorway with his hair slightly disheveled, and his expression of someone who has slept lightly and is not entirely sure yet what the morning has decided to be. We looked at each other, and there was a moment, a brief one, just the crossing of eyes in the morning light, in which everything from the night before was present and acknowledged without requiring any words at all. "Coffee?" I said. "Please," he said. We sat at the kitchen table again. The same table, the same two chairs, daylight now instead of the deep middle of the night, and drank our coffee and were quiet in a way that was comfortable rather than charged. The silence of two people who have said enough true things that silence doesn't feel threatening. "How are you?" he asked, not casually, with the genuine specificity of someone asking about something real. "Scared," I said, and also the least scared I've felt in a long time, which is a strange combination. "Yeah," he said, "it is. It's also the right combination, I think." "How are you?" He considered it. "Glad," he said, "mostly glad. Also, I keep waiting for the part where last night turns out to have been a very vivid dream." "It wasn't a dream," I said. "I know." He looked at me across the table. Morning light, coffee cups, the city outside just beginning its Saturday. "I know it wasn't." Slow and real. What happened after was slow and real and careful in the best possible way. Careful meaning not timid, but intentional. The care of people who are holding something they value and want to hold well. We had coffee again the following Saturday, and then a walk along the river, and then dinner at a place neither of us had been to before, which felt right, somewhere new, somewhere that belonged to this new version of things rather than the old one. We talked about everything and also about what we were doing, naming it as we went rather than letting it remain unnamed, which was the opposite of what we had both been doing for the previous months and felt, accordingly, like a conscious and deliberate choice. "Is this a date?" I asked at dinner, because it seemed important to be clear rather than to manage the ambiguity. He looked at me across the table. "Do you want it to be?" "Yes," I said, directly, the way I had been practicing the 3M directness carried into daylight. "Then yes," he said, "it's a date." And it was. The first of what became, over the following months, a regular and genuine and steadily deepening thing. Not a transformation of the friendship into something unrecognizable. It was still the same ease, the same humor, the same quality of being most fully myself in his company. It was that plus something more. The friendship had been the foundation all along. What was being built on it now had the foundation's character, solid, honest, chosen. There were hard things. There were always hard things. I told my brother in April. He was the one I was closest to among my siblings and the one I trusted most with the real things. The telling was on a phone call, 2,000 miles apart, my voice carefully steady and his end quiet after I said it. Then, "Mano, you've been carrying this alone." "Yes," I said. "For how long?" 8 years. A silence. "Then, you should have told me 8 years ago." "I know," I said. "I know that now." "Are you okay, like actually?" "Yes," I said, and meant it. "More okay than I've been in a long time." He asked about Caleb. I had mentioned him, the shape of things, the 3M conversation. He listened to the whole thing and then said, with the directness that had always been his particular quality, "He sounds like someone worth being scared for." "He is," I said. "Then stop being scared and actually do it." "I'm working on it," I said. My parents were a longer journey. My mother, who was the center of the family and the person whose response I was most uncertain about, received the news in July when I went home for a visit and told her in the kitchen, appropriately enough, on a Wednesday afternoon when my father was at work, and my sisters were out. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I was holding my breath without realizing it. And then she said in Spanish, which is the language she uses for the things that matter most, "You are my son. You were my son before this, and you are my son after this." It was not the end of the conversation. There were more conversations after, some of them difficult, all of them real. My mother is a person of deep faith and specific convictions, and she is also a person of deep love, and the space between those things is a space I am navigating with her, carefully and without rushing, with the understanding that real relationships require time and honesty and the willingness to stay in the difficulty rather than retreat from it. My father took longer, is still taking longer. I am patient with this because I have learned in these past months that patience with the people you love is not the same as acceptance of their limitations. It is the choice to stay in the relationship while it finds its new shape, to be present in the discomfort of the transition rather than abandoning it because it is hard. Caleb is beside me through all of it. Not fixing anything, he knows better than to try to fix the things that need time rather than solutions. But present, steady. The person I call when the difficult conversation has happened and I need to put it down somewhere safe. The person whose kitchen I sometimes show up at late in the evening, the way he showed up at mine, and who makes tea and sits across the table and lets me say the real things. What 3 a.m. taught us. It is November, 8 months after the 3M conversation, and the world has changed shape in the way that worlds do when the truth finally gets enough room to exist in, not suddenly, not dramatically, but completely. The changed shape is better than the old one. It fits differently. It fits actually. Caleb and I are together. That sentence, simple and declarative, a fact I can say out loud without the interior arithmetic of risk and consequence, still carries a small charge of wonder every time I produce it. We are together, and it has the quality of something that was always true and is only now visible, the way certain things become clear not by changing, but by being seen correctly for the first time. Trivia Tuesday still happens. This is important to note because the friendship is still the foundation, still the thing underneath everything, the reason the rest of it works. We still argue about history and design, and which Austin neighborhood has the best breakfast spots, a debate that has been ongoing for 14 months and shows no signs of resolution. He still appears at my door with food when I have a deadline. I still answer the phone when he calls after a hard day with a student. All of that is exactly the same. And there is more now, more honesty, more of the interior shown and known, more of the real things said in daylight rather than only at 3 a.m. We are learning, together and separately, that vulnerability does not destroy what you love. That showing the full picture is not the end of safety, but the beginning of something more durable. That the thing you were most afraid to say was, in both our cases, also the thing that needed most to be said. Patrick, Caleb's student, the junior who confided in him on that hard week in March, is doing better. Caleb tells me this with the careful, privacy-honoring language of a teacher who knows what he can and cannot share, and I receive it the same way. Doing better, finding his way. Having in the form of a history teacher who noticed and stayed and showed up. One adult in the building who knows and does not make it a burden. I think about Patrick sometimes, this person I have never met. I think about what it means to be 17 and carrying something enormous alone, and to have someone see it and not look away. I think about Caleb sitting across from him after class and saying the right things, and then going home alone with the weight of it. I think about the fact that the week that brought Caleb to my apartment on that particular Friday, too tired and too heavy to maintain his usual management, was a week that began with an act of genuine care for a young person who needed it. The connections between things are not always visible when you are inside them. They become visible later, in retrospect, the way the shape of a year only makes sense from the distance of the year after. What I know now from that distance is this: the 3M conversation was not an accident. It was not only exhaustion and thin defenses and the hour wearing away at our usual performances. though it was all of those things too. It was also the result of 14 months of a friendship that had been building, carefully and genuinely, the specific conditions in which truth could finally be safe. We had made each other safe for the truth. We had been doing it all along, without knowing that was what we were doing. The 3M conversation was just the moment we finally let ourselves know it. It is a Tuesday evening in November. In an hour, there will be trivia. The team is currently in second place in the weekly standings, which Caleb considers a temporary situation, and I consider a fine place to be, and this difference of perspective has produced one of our longer-running and more enjoyable disagreements. He is in the living room, reading something for school with the specific quality of concentration that I have come to know well, the small crease between his brows, the occasional barely audible sound of someone encountering an idea they find interesting. I am in the kitchen, doing something practical, and I can see him from here in the warm light of the living room, and I feel, this is the honest word I feel at home. Not the home of a place exactly, the home of a person, the specific, irreplaceable warmth of being in the presence of the person who knows the full picture and has chosen to stay in it. 8 years of carrying something alone, and then one night, past 2 in the morning, with cold tea and thin defenses and the 3M honesty that goes around every careful management. I said the thing I had been too afraid to say, and he said the thing he had been carrying for 7 months, and neither of us was alone in it anymore. It changed everything, quietly, completely, without fanfare and without end. Neither of us expected it. Both of us, I think, had been hopping for it for longer than we knew. That is the thing about 3M. It takes away your excuses. It strips the performance down to the person underneath. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, when the person across the table is the right one, what you find underneath the performance is not something to be afraid of. It is something to finally, fully, completely be.
Hey guys, welcome to my YouTube channel Prism Heart Chronicles. Please subscribe to my channel for more videos.